the important issues for the Tea Party element, at least, if not a greater part of the Republican Party, is whether the government should redistribute its citizens' wealth. What's your view on that?
Well, I think that's absolutely one of the key drivers of the Tea Party movement. No, and I share the sentiments of most people involved with the Tea Party, that it's really not the government's job to redistribute wealth. The government's job is to basically serve as a referee to create a fair environment for the free market to do its work as a general matter.
So that's what capitalism is all about, is letting people be free to choose and make their own decisions.
As Milton Friedman said.
And decide for themselves how to spend their own money, as opposed to sending it to Washington and having Washington decide how to allocate the capital.
Yeah, Washington then allocates the capital, and at every step along the way, you lose a certain value. Of every dollar that you send to Washington, you have a chunk that comes out from the people who collect it. You have a chunk that comes out for the agencies that distribute it. You have to pay the salaries of government workers, and at the end of the dollar, when it's spit back out of the federal government, it's not worth the same thing that it was worth when you sent it in.
So these stimulus packages never increase real demand, because every dollar that's used in the stimulus is taken from a private citizen, private entrepreneur. It's one job less that's created,
right? One
product or service less that's bought. So there isn't any actual increase in wealth. You can't increase wealth by taxing some citizens, taking their money and giving it to the government to allocate,
right?
Because it's every dollar that you take from the citizens is $1 less that we have for real demand.
Right.
And so if the government creates a job,
right,
well, they lost a job on the other side, so it's just neutral.
That's absolutely right. I mean, if you look at the way that the money is pulled from the citizens and spit back out, if you will, it's of course it's not creating any. I think not creating any additional demand. I mean, you're absolutely taking resources from the private sector that could be used in other ways, whether it's spent, whether it's saved. People talk about savings as if you put money in a bank and it sits there. Well, that's not what happens with savings. So if you're taking money away from people's savings, it's also, and sending it to the federal government, it's also sucking down demand, I think, and again,
and investment. They can't invest the money, right?
You can't invest the money that you don't have.
Right. So when the Democrats talk about job creation, in their minds, when they say, well, why doesn't the Republicans send a bill over to create jobs? What they really mean is, why don't the Republicans send over a bill where they increase government spending and we give this guy a job and that guy a job?
Sure.
That's their mindset.
I think
so how can you?
That's exactly what they're doing.
How can you? I mean, this is, you and me have clearly shown that this doesn't make any sense, because why doesn't anybody ever ask them, okay, you took $450 billion from the private sector now in this new idea of yours, so that's $450 billion that they have less, so now you're going to spend this on these jobs or whatever, so you haven't created anything, you're taking jobs from one side and giving them, so why is that point so hard to make?
I don't think it's hard to make. What they will argue, and they're arguing, I mean, look, the president is actually saying this rather directly with this new $450 billion stimulus package that he's proposing. I mean, he set aside, once again, as he did in the first stimulus, money to, quote unquote, save the jobs of public sector employees in the states. These are just transfers to the states. The federal government transferring taxpayer money to the states so that the states can hire more public sector workers at a time when I think most people agree. Again, polls show this, whether you're independent or conservative or however you want to describe yourself, the majority of people believe that the federal government and state governments should be doing less in this current sort of fiscal problem that we're having, the debt, the state deficits, the national debt, and the Obama administration is seemingly ignoring that, saying, no, we're going to transfer these funds to the states so that the states can hire. And there's no question that the states can, quote unquote, create jobs if you give them the money to, but what you're not, it's not a net creation of jobs. It's, if I gave you $100,000, you could create probably, let's say, 4 $25,000 jobs, but it's not a net creation of jobs.
And you would be able to, you personally would be able to create 4 jobs less.
Less, exactly.
So there wasn't any net increase.
Right, exactly.
Well, that's the point that I missed, that why such a simple point and they don't seem to grasp it. But I know you're doing your best to make this this point, and
We try.
I've seen you try, because you have your little debates, and maybe one day you'll succeed.
Yeah, let's hope. Let's hope.
So here's a question. So you're basically against redistribution of wealth. So would you be against farm subsidies?
Yeah, as a general proposition, I think farm subsidies should be phased out.
So we shouldn't have farm subsidies either, or what about foreign aid, where they tax the American citizens in order to give the money to foreigners?
I think foreign aid can be, if applied and used in a limited fashion, helpful for the long-term security interests of the United States. But as a general rule, do I think it's a good idea for the U.S. government to take taxpayer money and engage in what are effectively giveaways without strings attached? No, I don't think that's a good idea.
But sometimes you think it's a good
Sometimes
idea?
I think it's a good idea.
To tax the American citizens and give the money to foreigners?
Sometimes
That's
I think
redistribution of wealth, no?
Yeah, it is. Well, I would say it's, sure, if you want to call it redistribution of wealth, you could call it redistribution of wealth. I would say that there are certain things that the government does, certain times the government spends taxpayer money that we could classify as redistribution of wealth that are defensible, if not something that you'd be eager to participate in.
So you're in favor of some redistribution of wealth programs?
If you count foreign aid as redistribution of wealth.
Or some of the farm subsidies, or what about the TARP?
TARP, I think, was...
bankers bailout, all that?
Yeah, bankers bailout, auto bailouts. No, I mean, as a general rule, I don't think it's a good idea for the federal government to abandon capitalism to save capitalism, as President Bush put it.
And so what about Medicare and Medicaid? Those are wealth transfer programs where they tax some citizens in order to provide goods and services for others. Would you be against those as well? Do you think those should be phased out?
I think they should be restructured. I think there's no question that they have to. You have to restructure Medicare and Medicaid in a way that makes, that gives individuals control of the money to the extent that's possible, to give individuals control of the money that they're spending on their health care.
But basically you're against those, or you think some form of Medicaid?
I think, look, if the basic question is, should we abandon a social safety net altogether, despite my, I'd say, strong libertarian inclinations? No, I don't think you should abandon a social safety net altogether. But it has to be very limited. It should be run based on the principles of subsidiarity, which suggests that the local governments engage in these kinds of things and can do it much more efficiently and effectively than the federal government. So, I think it's not inappropriate in a free society to have such a system, to have such a safety net. It just needs to be much, much more strictly limited than it is in our current situation.
Do you think that the government should protect all peaceful citizens against people that want to use force to take their money?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, there are some people in our society that would like to get their hands on other people's money, right?
Okay.
Should the government protect the peaceful citizens against these people that want to use force to take their money?
Give me an example.
Well, let's say an example would be farmers. They would like the taxpayers to pay them for not farming. And so that would be one example. Would you think that the government should protect the taxpayers against these people that want to organize and forcefully take the money from the taxpayers?
So who's using force in that scenario? The farmers?
Well, the farmers don't use force directly. What they do is they persuade the government to pass a law requiring the taxpayers to pay them for not farming.
Right.
So my question is, should the government protect, well, let's talk in general, let's say anybody. Should the government, say there's a gang of thugs who want to take your money, should the government protect you against them?
Sure.
They should, right?
Sure.
So they should, if that gang is a bunch of farmers that come to your house with shotguns, they should also protect you. So why don't they protect you against them when they organize politically and persuade the government to require you to pay them?
Because there's a whole process involved. There's a whole middle step.
But
the process matters. I mean,
does that make it right?
Yeah, after it goes through the process, I think if you look at the way that our government is structured and you believe in a government based on consent, if those are the laws that are passed, I think, yeah, then you have the right and the opportunity to organize and try to make the opposite arguments.
So you would say that that's morally okay for them to have a government that is involved in this redistribution of wealth, where various special interest groups organize?
No, as I say, I would prefer not to have government involved in widespread redistribution of wealth. And you asked about farm subsidies in particular.
Right.
I think we should phase out farm subsidies. I think it's a good idea to get rid of farm subsidies. I think they're anti-competitive. I think it's not a good idea to have them. But if you're asking, you know, are they somehow, because they've come into being through the American process with elections and the legislative process, that they're somehow improper, I guess I would say no. I would say I don't like them. I would say I wish that they didn't exist. I would say we should argue as forcefully as we can against them, if that's what we believe. But I don't view that as analogous to the scenario you raised earlier, where somebody comes to me with guns and tries to take my money.
I guess the basic question is, should the government have the power to redistribute the wealth so that they're open to the biddings of the various special interest groups that want to organize and require them to give the money legally?
I got a lot.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Well,
thank you for having me.
Very interesting discussion, and nice to share your reasoning with us.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I apologize. I have to go. The debate started.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Was it intellectually stimulating?
Yeah, it's interesting. I love to get into that. It's better than the day-to-day stuff.
It's an interesting thing to consider.
It is. It is. Absolutely. Thanks again.
Bye-bye then.
Texas Governor Rick Perry.